Welcome back, everyone. Close the door. Turn everything else off. Because what we are discussing today is one of the most psychologically seismic events in the entire landscape of narcissistic relationships, the moment the empath finally walks away. And what happens next inside the narcissist is something nobody fully prepared you to understand. For years, the narrative has been one-sided. The empath leaves, broken and exhausted. The narcissist moves on effortlessly, already charming the next person, seemingly untouched. That is the story the narcissist performs for the world. But beneath that performance, in the psychological interior no one is allowed to witness, something entirely different is happening. Here is the question that this entire video is built around. The question that survivors ask in therapy, in support groups, in the quiet of their own minds long after the relationship ends. Did leaving actually hurt them? Did any of it matter to them at all? Today, we answer that question with psychological precision and zero mercy for comfortable illusions. The narcissist wants you to believe they are fine. They need you to believe they are fine. Because the moment you understand what your departure actually triggered inside them, the moment you grasp the true psychological catastrophe your absence created, you stop feeling like the one who lost. And that shift in perception is something they cannot afford to let you have. What the narcissist never told you, what they are constitutionally incapable of admitting, is that you were not just a partner to them. You were a psychological life support system. Your empathy, your emotional availability, your extraordinary capacity to feel deeply and forgive completely, these were not just qualities they appreciated. They were functions they depended on to survive. Remove a person from a relationship and they grieve. Remove a life support system from a narcissist and something far more primal occurs. A psychological destabilization that reaches all the way down to the foundational architecture of their constructed identity. That destabilization has a name in clinical psychology. Today, we walk through it step by devastating step. This video is not about celebrating the narcissist's suffering. It is about truth. Complete, documented, psychologically grounded truth. Because survivors of narcissistic abuse deserve to understand exactly what their presence meant, not the distorted, devalued version the narcissist performed at the end, but the real, measurable, psychological truth of how irreplaceable they actually were. What you are about to hear will reframe your entire understanding of why the relationship unfolded the way it did. Why the narcissist fought so hard to keep you, then discarded you. Why they returned, then left again. Why they simultaneously needed you and destroyed you. All of it becomes clear when you understand what happens inside them the moment you stop coming back. Stay with every word of this. Because this is not just information about them. This is a mirror held up to your own strength. The strength you carried inside a dynamic design to make you forget you had it. The strength that made you, to a narcissist, the most valuable and the most terrifying person they ever encountered. By the time we reach the final paragraph of this video, you will understand something that changes everything, that your leaving was not a defeat. It was a detonation. And the narcissist has been living in the wreckage of that explosion ever since. Let us walk through the rubble together and find your power buried inside every piece of it. To understand the narcissist's internal collapse after the empath leaves, you must first understand the architecture of narcissistic supply. Supply is not simply attention or admiration, though those are components. At its deepest level, supply is the external validation that substitutes for an internal sense of self the narcissist never successfully developed. The narcissist has no stable internal identity. This is not metaphor, this is clinical reality. Beneath the grandiosity, the charm, the calculated cruelty, lives a psychological void where a coherent self should exist. That void requires constant external filling. And the empath, with their extraordinary emotional depth and bottomless capacity for empathy, was the single most effective void filler the narcissist had ever encountered. Think of it this way. The narcissist is a structure built entirely of mirrors, each mirror reflecting back an image of themselves borrowed from someone else's perception. The empath, by nature, held the most generous mirror of all. They reflected back not just who the narcissist was, but who the narcissist could become. That reflected potential was intoxicating. It was also the foundation of the narcissist's entire psychological stability. This is why the narcissist's behavior toward the empath was always paradoxical, simultaneously pulling them closer and pushing them away, idealizing and devaluing, worshipping and destroying. The narcissist needed the empath's mirror desperately. They also resented that need with equal desperation. Dependency felt like weakness. And weakness, to a narcissist, is existentially intolerable. The empath's emotional intelligence made them uniquely dangerous to the narcissist's constructed reality. The empath saw through performances. They felt the inauthenticity beneath the charm. They recognized the fear behind the cruelty. And the narcissist knew, at some deep, inarticulate level, that they were being seen clearly. That visibility was both the thing they craved most and the thing they feared beyond all else. Here is the psychological mechanism that makes the empath's departure so catastrophic, what clinicians call object constancy failure. The narcissist cannot maintain a stable internal image of a person when that person is absent. When the empath leaves, they do not simply become someone who is gone. In the narcissist's psychological experience, they cease to exist as a stable, comforting presence entirely. The loss is not gradual. It is sudden, total, and devastating. The empath also provided something the narcissist's other supply sources could not: emotional regulation. The narcissist's internal emotional world is chaotic, volatile, and uncontained. Empaths, by nature, create emotional stability in their environment. They absorb tension. They diffuse conflict. They generate a psychological calm that the narcissist's dysregulated nervous system latched onto and became dependent upon without ever acknowledging that dependence. This is the hidden truth of every narcissistic relationship. Beneath the power dynamic, beneath the control and the cruelty, the narcissist was more dependent on the empath than the empath was ever dependent on them. The relationship was not a mutual exchange degraded by one party's selfishness. It was a parasitic arrangement in which the host's departure leaves the parasite without a survival mechanism. The narcissist's grandiosity, the armor they wear against this terrifying dependency, intensifies dramatically after the empath leaves. Outwardly, they perform indifference with theatrical precision. New relationships materialize quickly and are displayed conspicuously. Success stories circulate through mutual networks. The performance of thriving accelerates exactly in proportion to the internal reality of unraveling. Because here is what the performance conceals. Beneath the accelerated grandiosity, the narcissist is experiencing something they have no language for and no tools to process: genuine psychological need going unmet. The empath was meeting needs the narcissist never admitted having. And now those needs, vast, hungry, and completely unacknowledged, are screaming in the silence the empath left behind. The first turning point arrives approximately 2 to 6 weeks after the empath's departure, when the narcissist's initial performance of indifference collides with the reality that the empath is not returning. Until this point, the narcissist has been operating on the assumption, built from years of successful hoovering, that the empath will eventually reach back. When that reach does not come, something cracks. The crack presents first as irritability, then as disproportionate rage triggered by minor inconveniences. The narcissist begins experiencing what psychologists call narcissistic injury, the acute pain of an ego that has been denied the validation it requires to maintain stability. Without the empath's emotional presence to regulate against, every minor frustration becomes an unbearable assault on the fragile self. Then comes the hoovering, the narcissist's attempt to vacuum the empath back into the dynamic. But here is the psychological plot twist that defines this chapter. The empath who has done genuine healing work does not respond to hoovering the way they once did. And the narcissist's encounter with a healed empath's boundary is one of the most disorienting experiences in their psychological repertoire. The narcissist deployed hoovering techniques that previously worked with surgical precision: the vulnerability performance, the love-bombing resurgence, the promise of genuine change, the weaponized nostalgia. Against a healed empath, these tools produce something the narcissist has rarely experienced: complete, composed non-reaction. And nothing destabilizes a narcissist more profoundly than performing for an audience that refuses to applaud. The power dynamic reverses visibly in this moment. The narcissist, who spent the entire relationship in the dominant, controlling position, is now in pursuit, reaching, initiating, awaiting response. These are behavioral positions entirely foreign to their psychological comfort zone. The discomfort produces escalation, and escalation without a regulated empath to absorb it begins to spiral outward. The narcissist's new supply sources begin experiencing the full intensity of the destabilization the empath's departure created. Without the empath's regulation, the narcissist's mask slips faster with new partners. The idealization phase shortens dramatically. The devaluation arrives earlier and harsher. New relationships burn through their lifespan at accelerated rates because the narcissist is no longer capable of the sustained performance the empath's presence made possible. This is the plot twist the narcissist never scripted, that the empath was not just supply. The empath was infrastructure. The emotional framework within which the narcissist's most functional version of themselves could temporarily exist. Remove the infrastructure and the building does not simply lose its contents. The building itself becomes structurally unsound. Meanwhile, the empath is healing. This parallel reality, the narcissist deteriorating while the empath recovers, is precisely the reversal the narcissist feared and spent years engineering the relationship to prevent. Their devaluation campaigns, their systematic erosion of the empath's self-worth, their calculated destruction of the empath's external support systems. All of it was unconsciously designed to ensure the empath would not have the resources to thrive in their absence. But the empath, against every calculation the narcissist made, is thriving. Slowly, then powerfully. Rebuilding connections that were systematically sabotaged. Recovering a sense of self that was methodically dismantled. Remembering strengths that were consistently minimized. And each visible step of the empath's recovery is, to the narcissist's monitoring awareness, a confirmation of the irreversible nature of their loss. The turning point reaches its apex when the narcissist realizes, in whatever limited capacity they are capable of realization, that the empath is not coming back. Not because they cannot, but because they have chosen, with full awareness and recovered self-worth, not to. That choice, free, clear, and final, is the most psychologically devastating thing a narcissist can witness. Because it confirms the one truth their entire personality structure was constructed to deny: they were never actually in control. The collapse is not cinematic. It does not arrive with dramatic confessions or public breakdowns. It seeps through the cracks of the narcissist's carefully maintained exterior in ways that only those paying close attention will recognize: erratic decision-making, intensified need for validation from increasingly broad audiences, a desperation beneath the charm that was never visible before. The professional sphere begins to reflect the internal disintegration. The narcissist's performance at work, in business, in creative endeavors, all of which were subtly stabilized by the empath's emotional support, begins showing inconsistency. Colleagues who once found them magnetic begin noticing volatility. The mask requires more energy to maintain than the narcissist's depleted reserves can consistently provide. Social relationships begin fracturing at an accelerated rate. The narcissist's interpersonal style, which the empath's presence helped moderate, however unconsciously, is now operating without a moderating influence. People encounter the full, unfiltered narcissistic dynamic and exit quickly. The social circle that once appeared robust begins thinning in ways the narcissist attempts to explain away but cannot fully conceal. Here is the consequence the narcissist never calculated. The empath's departure did not just remove a supply source. It removed the social credibility the empath's association provided. The empath, by nature, is typically well regarded, genuinely warm, authentically connected, broadly trusted. The narcissist borrowed that social credibility like borrowed light. Without the empath, that borrowed warmth disappears from their social atmosphere entirely. The internal experience of the narcissist during this collapse is something clinical literature describes but rarely conveys with sufficient weight. It is a state of chronic, unacknowledged grief layered over an equally unacknowledged terror. grief for the supply source, terror of the void that supply was filling, and beneath both, a growing, suffocating awareness of the emptiness that has always been there, which the relationship with the empath was the most effective camouflage they ever found. The rage intensifies as the collapse deepens. Narcissistic rage, disproportionate, destabilizing, often publicly damaging, becomes more frequent and less controlled. Without the empath's presence to absorb and redirect that rage, it explodes outward onto whoever is nearest. New partners bear the full force of it. Professional relationships sustain collateral damage. The narcissist begins leaving a visible trail of destruction that their charm can no longer fully repair. The smear campaign against the empath, if one is launched, begins to backfire during this phase. People who initially accepted the narcissist's version of events begin encountering the empath's lived reality and finding it impossible to reconcile with the narrative they were sold. The empath's healing, their clarity, their composed demeanor in the face of character assassination, all of it communicates a credibility that the narcissist's increasingly erratic behavior cannot match. The narcissist begins a pattern of reaching backward, contacting former supply sources, reconnecting with people from their past, attempting to reconstruct a supply network substantial enough to replace what the empath provided. But each connection is insufficient. Each new mirror reflects back an image the narcissist cannot fully inhabit. Because the empath did not just see them, the empath saw through them and stayed anyway. Finding that again, in the psychological wasteland of their own creation, proves impossible. The darkest consequence of this collapse is one the narcissist will never speak aloud and may never fully consciously acknowledge. The recognition that the empath was the closest thing to genuine connection they ever experienced. Not because the narcissist is capable of genuine connection, but because the empath's extraordinary depth created the simulation of it so convincingly that even the narcissist, at their most defended, was temporarily fooled by their own performance into believing it was real. And that recognition, that the most real thing they ever had was something they systematically destroyed with their own hands, is the consequence that no new supply can soothe, no performance can conceal, and no amount of grandiosity can override. It lives in the narcissist's psychological interior like a splinter too deep to reach, invisible from the outside, permanently present from within. Here is the final truth. The one this entire journey was always building toward. When the empath leaves, the narcissist's hell begins, not because the empath intended it, not because the empath wished it, but because the narcissist constructed a psychological world with only one load-bearing wall. And that wall walked out the door carrying a bag they packed themselves with trembling, liberated hands. You were never replaceable to them. Not in the way they needed you. They will find new supply, they always do. But supply is not the same as what you provided. Supply is fuel. What you provided was architecture. And you cannot replace architecture with fuel. You cannot rebuild a collapsed structure by pouring more of what ran through it before. To every empath who left, or is standing at the edge of leaving right now, understand this with every part of yourself. The fear that they will be fine without you is not prophecy. It is trauma conditioning. It is the voice of every devaluation they ever delivered, still echoing in your nervous system, still doing its designed work of keeping you small, uncertain, and tethered to someone who was consuming you alive. The hell that begins for the narcissist when you leave is not your responsibility. You did not create their void. You did not cause their inability to form authentic connection. You were not the author of their psychological fragmentation. You were simply the most recent person they recruited to paper over it. The void existed before you. It will exist after you. It is not yours to fill. What is yours is everything waiting on the other side of this relationship. The version of yourself that existed before the systematic erosion began. That version did not die. It went underground. It survived. And it has been waiting, with a patience that mirrors your own extraordinary nature, for you to create the conditions in which it is finally safe to resurface. The empath who has survived a narcissistic relationship and done the work of genuine healing possesses something extraordinarily rare, a depth of self-knowledge that most people spend entire lifetimes attempting to acquire. You know your triggers. You know your patterns. You know the specific textures of manipulation that once worked on you and now register as immediately recognizable. That knowledge is not damage. That knowledge is armor. Let the grief be complete. Let it move through you without resistance, without timeline, without the pressure to perform recovery faster than it organically arrives. The grief is proportional to the love you genuinely brought to that relationship, and that love was real regardless of what met it on the other side. Honor it. Let it finish. And then let it become the rich, dark soil from which something entirely new and entirely yours begins to grow. The narcissist is not thinking about your well-being right now. They are thinking about their void. They are scanning their environment for replacement supply. They are managing the performance of their collapse with whatever energy their depleted reserves can still generate. None of that is about you anymore. None of that requires your attention, your energy, or the smallest fragment of your extraordinary emotional capacity. Direct every ounce of that capacity inward now. You spent years, perhaps decades, deploying your empathy outward into a dynamic that consumed it without reciprocating it. Now aim it at yourself. With the same ferocity you once brought to understanding them, begin the work of understanding yourself. With the same tenacity you once brought to saving them, begin the work of saving yourself. The return on that investment will be unlike anything the relationship ever provided. When an empath leaves, the narcissist's hell begins. But when an empath leaves, and heals, and remembers who they are, and builds a life anchored in authenticity and genuine reciprocity, that is not just the end of the narcissist's story. That is the beginning of the empathos. And that beginning, forged in the specific fire of everything you survived, will be the most powerful, most authentic, most completely yours thing you have ever lived. Start it now.